I'm Nicole's grandpa. I was in Vietnam in the year of 66 to 67 in the United States Army. I made the rank of E4. I was over in Vietnam for a full year. So I'm going to read this off of something that I put together, otherwise I'm going to forget a lot of important details. I was born March 31st, 1945 in Fort Riley, Kansas, where my father was stationed in the Army. After World War II, my family moved to Minnesota, where I graduated from North St. Paul High School in 1963. In September of 1965, I was drafted into the Army. I reported to the St. Paul Army and then was sent to Minneapolis for a physical at the Federal Building. Once I took the oath, I went to train at Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri for 9 weeks of boot camp. I was assigned to advanced training, specifically general supply training at Fort Lee, Virginia. A 6-week course. General supply entailed working in supply room at the base issuing clothing and other items. I continued advanced training by reporting to Fort Ord, California in January of 1966 for quartermaster supply instruction. With all this training completed, I received my first assignment in the United States at Fort Sill, Oklahoma, where I worked in a quartermaster supply store. In the fall of 1966, orders to be secured area came through. I was instructed to dye all of my clothing green. And then I received several shots, including one for malaria. Before leaving for overseas, I went to Fort Lee, Virginia, which was the meeting point for the newly formed supply division, the 560th Combat Support Unit. We proceeded to San Diego for a 2-week advanced course on convoy training. We were instructed on how to survive and stay safe while transporting supplies. Finally, we boarded a merchant ship, the General H.J. Gaffey, and converted into a troop carrier. It took 2.5 weeks for them to reach the destination. Halfway through the trip, they were informed that the location was Vietnam. Once in Vietnam, my unit went to Da Nang, where they disassembled from the ship and traveled by truck to the airport. They were flown inland and they once again boarded trucks to where they were stationed near the South China Sea. This was a new base and 5 warehouses were already set up for us. However, there were no permanent sleeping quarters and soldiers slept in tents and sand floors for 6 months. These living conditions were extremely uncomfortable due to blowing sand, hot weather, heavy monsoon rains, and the prevalence of rats. By the spring of '67, the Navy Seabees came to build permanent structures. Those buildings had wooden floors, screens, and tin roofs. Also stationed at my base, there was the 863rd Transportation Company, which supplied the trucks, and the 85th Maintenance Company, which was in charge of repairing trucks and other vehicles. Trucks were vital in bringing supplies from the ships to the base and then into the new destination. In addition to their regular duties, all soldiers were required to pull guard duty to protect the base. I drove a 2.5-ton truck and often delivered supplies, transported other soldiers, took things to the dump site, plus any other transportation tasks. Monsoon season was particularly difficult for driving as the rain formed lake-sized puddles, making it nearly impossible to navigate the roads. Because I had typing skills, I also worked in the warehouse filling orders. Those were 12-hour days with shifts 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. or 6 p.m. to 6 a.m. In the summer of '67, the base prepared a stage and hosted a USO show. I had seen Bob Hope and Joey Heatherton in person, not very close because there were thousands of other troops there. Next door to the base was an orphanage ran by an order of French nuns who had escaped from the Chinese regime. The soldiers put on a Christmas program for the children with food and gifts. I left Vietnam in the fall of 1967. Was discharged out of Fort Lewis, Washington. At American Hoist and Derrick, I returned to work. I completed 20 years. In 1968, I married my wife, Alice, and together we raised 5 children in South St. Paul. Yeah, I bought a couple of tape recorders, and one I mailed to my parents and one I mailed to then my girlfriend, Alice, which is my wife, of course. And we sent tapes back and forth. And the safest way to travel in Vietnam then was by air. They're very noisy, they're not really insulated, and when you take off from you go straight up in the air. You don't go off gently, because they may shoot you down. And then when you land, you just about do a nosedive. You don't descend slowly, because the quicker you can get down, the more chance you have of living, really. And it was an experience that way. Well, we were on the coast, which was on the South China Sea. I made a lot of deliveries that were inland through jungle areas, where you have outposts, like they would have outposts around the airport. Da Nang was one of the biggest airports or airfields in the country. To protect the airport, they had little divisions in the hills. There was hills around it, and there was maybe a tank hidden in the hillside with maybe a crew of 5. We'd make deliveries to them, and if anything got rocketed, which it did, they would come out of the hills and for support. We did have laundry when we were there. The Vietnamese people would do the laundry. They'd come down in a little Jeep, and we'd hand them our laundry and they'd bring it back. And the thing with that was they would use like a banana starch. It was very crisp and uncomfortable and kind of smelled, but it was at least pretty clean, you know. This was interesting too. We took pictures, and then we were having them developed in country. After a while, that was a bad idea, because when places there would get attacked by mortar, we were wondering how they knew where everything was. Well, guys were taking pictures of their bases, and the Viet Cong were taking the pictures out of there. They would send you the pictures you took, but they would also take copies. When the particular night when this rocket attack was, when you're woken up by that, we had a big sandbagged bunker that we went into. We could hear the rockets going over us from where they were fired to the airport. The concussion of it just kind of moved our pants legs a little bit. So we were lucky that they didn't hit our unit, but the captain at one time said that there was a whole Viet Cong battalion moving through the area, so that we were to be on alert. Things I think that everybody goes through is, when I first got there, you're nervous because it's a different type of war that people may not understand. It's not like World War I or World War II, or where this is all what they call a guerrilla type warfare, where it can be a nice day and everything, and then all hell breaks loose, you know, either a rocket attack or whatever. And for the first couple of weeks, what's on your mind is, you know, are you going to get killed? Because you know people are getting killed over there. After that goes through your mind, you think, well, I'm here to do a job. I better just do the job. So then you go on. Life gets easier because you're not thinking about it. What's worse is about 2 weeks before you go home, you hear about people that, oh, he got killed, he only had 2 weeks left and he got killed. So now that's bigger stress, because you think it's going to happen to me. You're a bundle of nerves all this time, but you make it through. When I went over on the ship, and when I come back, I flew back. There were 3 people after I got back that I communicated with. 2 of them I lost communication with, and there's still one today. We send Christmas cards to each other every year. I returned to the United States before he did. He had another year to serve, and when he got home, he got married, and he invited me to his wedding. Well, I'm involved with the VFW. They have a last man's club, they call it. Once a year, we have a dinner and get together, and we have camaraderie of talk about events when we were overseas. And of course, there's people that were medics in here. There's people like myself that were in the motor pool delivering supplies throughout the country. And you know, the Vietnam War was a strange war, and people just they kind of blamed the troops fighting over there, myself included. But it was a political, they called it a police action, just like they did Korea. We didn't feel comfortable coming back at all, because not like they are today. And you know, we were just very poorly treated. We were blamed for the war, really. It was, and people realize it now, and we're getting what's due to us now. People are appreciating us, and if I wear my Vietnam hat, I've had people come up to me and shake my hand and say thank you for your service. Yeah, you know, and that's all we really wanted. But it was a political war. It just, they didn't treat the troops right, and they are now, finally.